Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all gearing to go, ready to go for today as we talk about industrialization. I'm delighted to say, as you heard from Sanku, we have His Excellency Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, Vice President of Ghana. Welcome. And beside me is Mohammed Dewji, who's the Chief Executive Officer of METL Group from Tanzania. Both are going to bring very different but very enlightening perspectives, I'm sure, to the question of industrialization and whether industrialization is the main route to development and prosperity in sub-Saharan Africa. We do have another poll for you to answer today. And we're asking, can Africa create jobs for its growing population through industrialization? So I think most of you would have downloaded the app. If you haven't, you can go to slido.com, put in GBF Africa and answer the question. The answers being yes, manufacturing is the only route to prosperity, or no, technology has changed the dynamics of industrialization. So we'll get the answers to that as we go through the next 25 minutes or so. But first, let's begin, Dr. Bawumia. May I ask you, please, to give us the perspective you're coming from when we look at industrialization and how it is going to contribute to the prosperity of Africa?
Thank you very much. I think that if you look at history, whether it's the Britain or the United States or Japan, China recently, the history is that industrialization has been very key in the development of many, many countries. The question today is, with the way technology is moving, with automation, with robotics and so on, whether that is going to be the same for Africa. If you look at Africa and you look at the amount of the population, about 1.2 billion, and the fact that you're going to be having 29 million people enter the labor force each year up till 2030, it is very clear that industrialization, in whatever form it takes, is going to be very key in the development of Africa. And I think that is something that is clear that the potential exists for that to happen. Today, 11% of Africa's GDP is in manufacturing value added. That's quite low compared to, say, in Asia, where you have East Asia is 23%, Latin America 16%. So you have room for that to happen. And so we, I think, in Africa are very clear, and this is why you have 26 countries that have industrial development plans in Africa today, and I think it's very clear that industrialization will be a key for development and prosperity in Africa going forward.
And of course, the flip side to that is what role technology plays, Mohammed, in terms of, is it a rival to industrialization, or can the two be side by side when it comes to pushing prosperity? You're coming from the angle of the head of METL. Tell us where you're coming from and what you're hoping for.
So I'll give you a live example of myself. I got back to Tanzania in 1998. Our family business was predominantly a trading house, meaning imports and exports. But today, 17, 18 years later, we have over 41 industries. So everything from edible oils to cooking fats to margarines to soaps and detergents and grain milling and textiles. These were products that my father used to import from all over the world. And the government came out with very strategic policies in terms of protectionism, giving incentives. If you were to import raw material, you have to pay 0% tax, while if you bring in finished goods, you pay 25% tax. So that kind of led us to industrialize the country. Of course, automation, robotics, it's an important question. There are manufacturing countries that basically in manufacturing, if you look at PET, plastics, PET, HDP, LDP, water, juices. Before, what used to happen, you bring in preforms, and there would be one machine producing the preform, and then you'd take the preform and you'd blow them, and then it go filling and labeling and so on and so forth. Today, there's one single machine that is totally automized. So this cuts down the labor force. But on the other hand, if you look at cashew processing, there is no technology that can process cashew to the end without breaking the cashews. And once you break the cashews, that means the value goes down. So it depends industry to industry, but I think it should complement.
You mentioned government there, and obviously, Doctor, this is where you come in terms of how you're communicating with businesses, the bigger idea of industrialization versus technology. Tell us where you're coming from now as Vice President at Ghana.
Well, thank you very much. Coming from a perspective where I came from the central bank into government as Vice President, looking at the various facets of the economy and the various linkages.
Because you were the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Ghana, and then literally overnight went into the VP elections.
That's right. So we basically have a perspective of trying to understand what the linkages are amongst the various sectors in the macro economy. It's very, very important to set the macro right. So that there's stability that will drive industrialization. Investors and entrepreneurs cannot withstand instability, whether it's in the currency or it's inflation, whether it's in interest rates. So that stable macroeconomic environment is a public good that we try to provide. From our perspective as a government in Ghana, we have taken the view that we've got to move the paradigm from a focus on taxation, which tends to be a focus in many countries, a focus on taxation, to a focus on production. And therefore, you've got to put in the very incentives that will allow production to take place. You've got to formalize the economy. In Ghana, for example, we're saying, let's take advantage of technology to formalize the economy so that businesses can work. Let's make sure you issue digital biometric ID cards to everyone. Let's make sure you have a digital address system leveraging on GPS technology. So this year, we've launched digital IDs for everybody in Ghana. This year, we've launched a digital address system, which means you can find everybody. We have 66 billion addresses now in Ghana. Every 5 by 5 square meter of land and water in Ghana has a unique digital address. So it allows for commerce. You can deliver letters, you can deliver goods, and therefore expands the possibilities and opportunities to entrepreneurs. And then you need financial inclusion. And so this year, we are launching the interoperability also next month of the mobile payment systems amongst each other and between them and the banking systems so that you can have financial inclusion. These 3 pillars we are using for formalizing the economy. But beyond that, you've got to have strategies in both agriculture. It's very interesting because people talk about technology, but the point is that it doesn't mean that because there's new technology, you lose your comparative advantage as a continent. In Africa, if you look down the road, and even now, you'd see that the comparative advantage in agriculture and agro-processing is very, very clear. And for businesses that are in this area, you are going to be very competitive across the world. And there's nothing that should stop you and importing the volumes of food that we do in Africa. In Ghana, for example, we import $2 billion annually of food. And we have fertile land and we have water. And we have, tomatoes and so on, we could process into tomato paste and all of that. So there's there's room for you to do that. Between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, for example, we control 60% of the world's cocoa. 60%. So while some people could form OPEC, we could form COPEC and do cocoa. We can do it. With 60%, once we manufacture the cocoa, because today the farmer gets only 10% of the value of a bar of chocolate, even though we produce all of it. So so Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, we've gotten together and we've said enough of this. Let us coordinate, let us cooperate, and therefore we can push the value addition in cocoa.
I'm going to ask you how you can monitor that as well in a moment. But Mohammed, listening to that stability, progression, a clear plan, how quickly does that translate into business success? How does political ambition translate?
So from an entrepreneur point of view, I think there are also challenges in terms of government that need to address. One is infrastructure. It's very, very important. The time the goods come in terms of raw material, the clearance at the port, the efficiencies at the port. Two, Africa lacks rail. Now, my company, we have over 2,000 vehicles. I mean, that's a very tedious business of transporting goods from point A to point B. We all know that the rail is the cheapest mode of transport. I think governments need to invest money in infrastructure. Power is another area of challenge. You need, as industrialists, you need to have good power and relatively competitive power. Now, I'm in the textile industry, and I'm competing with China, and I'm competing with India. So we have cotton with relatively competitive labor. So what I do is I gin cotton, I spin, I weave, I process, I mercerize, I dye. Now we've gone into knitting, and we're also doing garmenting. But the issue is to have consistent power and competitive power. Yes, there are countries like Zambia and Mozambique, they're quite competitive. So I think from our perspective, our government, especially our President Magufuli, is really focusing on these principal areas. One last area is also corruption and red tape. So what our president has done is done a fantastic job. I mean, today corruption levels are very, very low in Tanzania. A lot of people have been prosecuted. A lot of people are in jail. So that's been addressed, one. Two, I read a World Bank report that says if we were to increase berth 13 and 14 in the Dar es Salaam port, our GDP would increase by 1.5%. So currently, the World Bank has funded us almost $300 million, and we're expanding that, so efficiencies are going to increase. We've hit gas of almost 60 trillion cubic feet in Tanzania, and we have given a contract to the Chinese for $2 billion to bring that gas from the south to Dar es Salaam, and now we're powering our gensets with gas, so electricity will not be a problem, and now we're investing almost $7 billion in our central rail line. So hopefully with all these things fixed, I believe that Tanzania should be growing at 10% GDP per year.
Thank you very much. And Mohammed, I agree with virtually everything that Mohammed has said. I think that it is one of the things that is sometimes very frustrating is that all these issues that you've enumerated, we've known them, and we know them, and governments across know what the problems are. What has really been lacking is the political leadership for a long time to actually get things done, to have the political will to get things done. But I see a generation of leaders in Africa that are coming along. Magufuli is there, you have Kagame, you have many leaders who are taking major steps in leading the drive for transformation. My president Nana Akufo-Addo, has made a similar, has set a similar vision for us. We came in, we've been 10 months in government. The ports, again, very key to the whole transformation agenda and the industrialization process. And we've said, there's so much inefficiency and corruption at these ports, we've got to move to a paperless port so that you take away the human interface. We announced this in May, and we set a deadline for September 1st to go paperless. And we achieved it because there was the will to do it. Of course, we had support to do it, but we did it. We've gone paperless also at Registrar General's Department today. You can register a business in Ghana, sitting in Dubai, and get your certificate within 24 to 48 hours. You don't need to go and do that. So we are making these reforms so that you can get the industrialization process moving. You said the business environment, right. But we've also known that infrastructure, whether it's rail or energy, is very key. And so you've got to make you've got to go ahead to make the sort of investments in the energy sector that are very important. In Ghana, for example, we have adopted a policy of only investing now in renewables as far as energy is concerned. And we've set the benchmarks. And so any new energy projects that are coming in henceforth will be in the renewable sector. And we think that that will set a new growth industry also in Ghana, and it will help. So I think that we should really focus on addressing some of the challenges. We know the challenges, but we've got to have the will to deal with them.
And I wonder, I mean, no one's going to disagree with that message, but I just wonder, we were hearing that same thing 10 years ago, and I'll talk to you about that in a moment. I want to give those of you who are watching a chance, perhaps if you want to ask a question. We do have some microphones in the room. If anyone does, we have about 8-9 minutes left on this session. We do have a couple of hands up in the room. We're going to get a microphone to you, I think. Yeah. Could you just keep your hand raised just so that they can spot where you are? Here we go. Oh, there's a microphone there. Yeah, lovely. If you'd just give us your name and your question, please.
Good morning. My name is Vinay. I'm actually a son of Ghana, having been born and raised there, even though I reside in Dubai now. My question is for both of you in the panel, and just very quickly to His Excellency the Vice President. I understand what you mean on industrialization. I commend the efforts that your government is taking in that regard with the one district, one factory policy. I believe it will be a success. You know, we're here at these crossroads, we're discussing industrialization. That's the topic of this panel. How and what kind of measures do businessmen who want to be active in Africa need to put in place? What are some of the things we need to be mindful of moving into this new era of industrialization,
Right.
by taking into account some of the mistakes others have made in the past, like the growth China has experienced, the growth India has experienced? They haven't come without their compromise and their sacrifice. What are some of the things we need to be mindful of moving forward?
Thank you, Vino. Doctor, would you like to answer first?
Well, yes. I think that for a business person going into Africa, I think you've got to assess, as with any business investment, you've got to assess the nature of stability in the country that you're going into. It's a major issue for many investors. Increasingly, we're seeing stable governments, more democratic governments, and so on. And so you will look at that factor, at political stability, you would look at macroeconomic stability, and you look at the business environment generally. Because if it's a business-friendly environment, then you're going to see a lot more opportunity. If it isn't a business-friendly environment, then you could possibly struggle. And so those are some of the areas you would want to look to. You look at the governance of the country, you look at the rule of law that is available and the respect for contracts and so on. I think these are some of the issues that you look to, and the education of the people, the labor force and so on, the skills available, and how and also the market that is available to you. I think these are some of the factors that any businessman would look to.
Mohammed, also the question is what measures the businesses need to have in place. You can assess, as you've said, Doctor, assess what the country's stable situation is. But as a business, what measures do you need in place, particularly from an entrepreneurial point of view? Because sometimes businesses work when there isn't stability. You take advantage of opportunities.
I think it's important. You see, we have 54 countries. Each and every country is very different in its own form. But as entrepreneurs, as investors, I echo what the Vice President says. I think rule of law is very important. I think access to capital is very, very important, because if you see the banking sector in many African countries is quite nascent. And I remember when I got back from university in Tanzania, Barclays Bank, at that time, their core capital was $2 million. And what they could lend was 20% of their core capital, so $400,000. So I realized there is no way I'm going to, be able to grow. So I decided going to South Africa, and just a couple of years ago, RNB Bank and NetBank and Investec, we did a syndication of $200 million. So you can find a country that is a good country, a stable country, but there are issues of excess of capital, then you run into a problem.
Any more questions? Gentleman at the mic. Briefly, if you wouldn't mind.
I think it works. My name is Gustavo Montero. I'm the chairman of Agar. Agar is a blockchain development company based in Dubai and in Europe. We have been asked already by a couple of governments in Africa to develop blockchain technology in their countries. I'd like to know from the Vice President, what is his view on developing blockchain technologies in Ghana, and particularly, what's his view in moving Ghana into a cryptocurrency country as a way of making that country a paperless country?
Dr. Bawumia.
Thank you very much. I think that I mean, blockchain technology can be very useful, and we are not averse to blockchain technology. Cryptocurrency, we are yet some ways off to cryptocurrency in a place like Ghana. Again, it is something that is in the distance, and it may come off down the road, but we're yet trying to get a single currency in West Africa, and we are moving in that direction. We are not yet there as far as cryptocurrencies are concerned.
Good stuff. Thank you very much for your question. We have time for one very brief one if you'd like to make your way to the microphone, and then I'd like some concluding thoughts. Thank you, sir.
My name is Raj Kulasingham. I work at international law firm Dentons.
Sorry, if you could just say your name again.
My name is Raj Kulasingham. I work
Raj.
at the international law firm Dentons. I have a question that actually addresses two things you talked about, industrialization and the discovery of gas. Both Ghana and Tanzania have discovered gas. I think Ghana is slightly ahead of the curve. I'd like your views on how that is playing into your development of the economy and industrialization. I have a personal interest in this because recently we advised Gazprom on its landmark gas sales agreement with GNPC in Ghana. I'm wondering what are the lessons that you've taken from that transaction and the development of the gas industry that could actually help other countries in Africa develop in the same way?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that from our point of view, gas is very, very key to lowering the cost of electricity generation in Ghana. And so the discovery of gas and the use of gas and piping it downstream is going to be very, very important for industrial development. We have a major project going to take place in Ghana in terms of the integration of the aluminum industry in Ghana. And it depends very much on cheap power. We want to use gas as well as hydropower to drive that industry. We have huge reserves of bauxite, which we want to process rather than export. And so from our point of view, gas and the discovery of gas should lower the cost of electricity, which we would actually be seeing, all things being equal, next year, some significant reductions, hopefully, in the cost of electricity for industrial production in Ghana, and as much as probably 25% reduction. And that should be a major catalyst to industrial production.
For the rest of sub-Saharan Africa as well, related
Well,
countries?
for the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, for those countries like Tanzania that have discovered gas, I think it should result in lower cost of electricity.
Yeah. So we were depending on hydro and having very inconsistent power, and since we've discovered gas, now our gensets are running on gas, so obviously power has become more consistent and the pricing has come down, one. But two, what we are trying to do is trying to look for investors who can come in and use gas. In the cement industry, Dangote is there now. We're looking at petrochemicals, huge power-consuming industries that potentially can use gas. And we're also working on putting about 4 trains of LNG. It's a $30 billion project that finally we could export that gas overseas.
We're coming to the end of our session. I want one more thought from both of you, a brief thought, if you would. 10 years ago, so we were talking about industrialization, and Dr. Bawumia, I alluded to this, that you addressed, as Mohammed, you addressed infrastructure, transportation, the problems there, and whether or not they've moved on. They're still buzzwords now. 10 years ago, we were discussing it. we're not as far as we were saying, or perhaps you both were saying 10 years ago we would be. In 10 years' time, very briefly, Mohammed, how far along the ambition, how much of the ambition would we have achieved?
I think we've made strides. That's why 10 years ago I had 0 industries and now I have 41 industries. But I believe now governments and the new leadership have become far more serious and they're addressing the core problems, and I'm hoping in the next 10 years we will not be discussing about these issues again. I think they will be sorted out. I'm confident.
That is ambitious. Dr. Bawumia.
Thank you. I think I'm also quite optimistic. What I see happening on the continent, what I see happening in my own country, are efforts to address the problems. We've talked about the railway for the longest time. Let's just do it. And we've started to do it. We've even appointed a minister in charge of railways, in particular, to make it done. You know, so we've got to do the things that have to be done. And we've got an industrialization strategy that is also learning from the mistakes of the past. And once you can learn from the mistakes of the past, you can avoid those mistakes. And so we hope that we are moving on a new trajectory in the next 10 years to see this whole industrialization take off. But we have to work hard at it.
His Excellency, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, thank you very much. And Mohammed Dewji, thank you very much for your time. And thank you for your participation. Thank you.